Welcome to the 26th episode of In Your Best Interest, an ALM First podcast. On this episode, we'll explore how aligning purpose, strategy, and culture can drive future results for organizations. We'll discuss how data plays a key role in justifying culture initiatives alongside real-life examples. Our guest, Jessica Kriegel, is a Chief Strategy Officer at Culture Partners and will share insights from their collaboration with Stanford University, which shows that organizations fully aligned on purpose, strategy, and culture see a 44.5% revenue growth over a 3-year period. Jessica will also recount her journey from humble beginnings to leadership, offering lessons on how challenges shape impactful leaders. We'll dive into Jessica's mission to quantify culture through data, aligning purpose and strategy for transformative results and mission-driven financial services. We'll ask her to debunk myths about corporate culture, focusing on embedding it into daily actions. Whether you're a leader looking to improve culture or curious about how workplace environments drive growth, this episode is sure to be full of valuable insights from Jessica. It's so great to have you as our guest today, Jessica. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So to start off, let's talk a little bit about your personal journey. What experiences have shaped your approach to leadership and culture?
Well, I suppose it's all the experiences I had when I first joined the workforce. My very first job was scrubbing toilets in the dormitory in my college dorm. That lasted about 3 weekends.
Wow, that's longer than I would have thought.
Yeah. And then my second job was cocktail waitress. That lasted 1 weekend. Third job was doing the dishes. That lasted 1 shift. And then I started to notice a pattern. I actually started to worry about my resiliency and my ability to make it in the world as a worker because I kept quitting my job. So the next job I took was in the call center, and I promised myself I would never give up that job. I would just keep it for years, no matter how much I hated it, to prove to myself that I could. And I stayed there for years. I hated every second of it, but I proved to myself I could be a worker. That was probably the first time where I learned that I didn't need my boss to make my life as wonderful as it could be in order to have that stick-to-itiveness and to enjoy my work. You know, it was the personal growth that I got out of it.
Yep.
And then my first corporate job after my MBA was another one that was touching because I got a very bad performance evaluation that devastated me and made me feel like I worked in a quote-unquote toxic environment. I didn't work in a toxic environment. I just felt that way because of the feedback that I got. So I've always been passionate about understanding how work works. How do you make people happy at work? How do you get results at work? How do all of those things come together? When I have had the joy to work in a place that is a winning workplace, that we're getting results, that people are passionate about their work they're doing, they're committed to the purpose, that's the golden goose right there. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we try and help all of our clients get, and that is what I research.
Cool. Well, let's start off by defining culture. Culture is something a lot of organizations tout, but it can be hard to define and even measure. So at a high level, tell us a little bit about your mission to quantify culture.
Yeah, so at Oracle, when I started focusing on culture, I started on the touchy-feely side of things, trying to convince everyone that they should do the right thing and that if they were focused on people, that something would happen to drive results, and you just have to have faith that focusing on people is the right thing to do. And what I learned is that fell on deaf ears, and there were some people who were into the idea of focusing on people, but there were a lot of business leaders that kept saying, show me the data, show me the data. Because remember, leaders are in a really difficult situation. They may want to do the right thing. They may want to focus on people. But if you do that at the expense of business results, you are in hot water as a leader. And so sometimes people are asking for the data not because they want to be convinced, but because they want to justify the decision that they will have made.
Yep.
And if they have data that backs up the decision, it won't be viewed as a bad decision. You can say it's covering your tail, really, right?
Right.
And so I got certified in the ROI of business programs with the ROI Institute. And I started putting everything through the ROI lens at Oracle, and all of my stuff was getting greenlit. Because I think what you have is a bunch of people wanting to make the right decision, but wanting to justify why that's good for the business in order to do it. And I was able to justify why it's good for the business. So that made my career. I mean, that was what shot me up the ranks. And so focusing on data just wins. Frankly, I am totally about the touchy-feeliness of culture, but inspiring people to care about culture because it's the right thing to do just doesn't pay over the long term. So you got to do the data. And it turns out it is good for business. You just have to show them exactly how.
So as someone who's driven by data, how do you balance quantitative data with the human elements of leadership and culture?
You're trying to measure the impact of those human things, the soft skills, on the bottom line. And so when we did our research with Stanford, we were digging into these businesses' underbellies. We're looking at culture as defined by employees. We're looking at their strategic plan, their purpose, which is the big mission, and revenue. And one of the insights from the Stanford research was about alignment of those things. And we found that when companies have their purpose, their strategy, and their culture aligned, that drove 3x results compared to companies that were misaligned. And most companies are misaligned. So you look at your world, you're with credit unions and community banks, very mission-driven organizations.
Yep.
Their purpose is strong. It is the North Star. It is at the heart of everything that they do. Now, the question is the strategy and the culture aligned to that purpose? Because a strong purpose isn't enough. You have to have the purpose is the why, the strategy is the how, and the culture is the way to get results. So a lot of organizations have a purpose statement that was created 30 years ago by the founders. They've got a strategy that was created in a boardroom by a bunch of executives, and then they have a culture that they delegated to HR. And it's a misalignment, which we have seen does not impact the bottom line as well. So alignment is really the key there.
So you touched on mission-driven organizations, and that's certainly our audience and who we work with. Why is a deeper understanding of workplace culture so important for the financial services industry?
Well, the framework at the heart of everything we do is called the results pyramid. And in the financial services industry, it is so straightforward to measure results. And so if you want to get results, you have to focus on the actions that drive those results. Actions come from beliefs, and beliefs come from our experiences. That's kind of the 4-part framework of the results pyramid. Experiences that are shaping our beliefs, which are driving people's actions, which are getting you the results. When you look at that framework, you realize that your culture, which is experiences and beliefs, it ultimately does drive results. People, I don't understand. Sometimes I get baffled by executives who think that culture is disconnected from results, because culture is ultimately how people think and act to get results. You can have the most brilliant strategy and the most incredible customer base and perfect product market fit, but if the people that work for you do not think and act according to the way that you need them to drive results, you're dead in the water. And so results are culture. If your culture is good, you're getting your results. As long as you think of culture as the way that people think and act to get results. When you think of culture as kombucha in the break room, and Thirsty Thursdays and ping pong tables and bean bags, well, then it doesn't drive results, but that's not how I think about culture.
So what are some of the common misconceptions about corporate culture have you encountered through your research?
I think that people think that the work of culture stops once you have memorialized it into a plaque. So you do a lot of focus groups and brainstorming and executive retreats to get a perfect mission statement. You get your 7 to 10 values. You have your definition of what those values are. So, we exist to impact the world, and our values are integrity and teamwork and collaboration, and everyone's got the same values, by the way. And a lot of those values are table stakes. They're not even values that will necessarily drive results, but they are things that you want to be associated with. You put them on a plaque and you call it done, and you've memorialized culture. But then the question is, how have you activated that in the hearts and minds of your employees? How do you scale that? How do you do it in a remote environment with a global employee base? The work of culture happens every day, and it's not something that you can have one and done. We did a culture program, we did a team building retreat, we got our plaque, we're done. Yeah, culture is about consistency and showing up every day.
So then how do you balance the need for innovation in corporate culture with respecting and integrating an organization's existing traditions and values?
Oh, I love this question. So here's another insight that came out of the Stanford research we did. We have a 35-year history at Culture Partners, formerly known as Partners in Leadership. We've worked with a lot of credit unions, actually. And one of the things that we did when I first joined a few years ago is I wanted to look at all of the things that our clients had come to us asking to fix over those 30 years. So we compiled data from flip charts that were in storage units and emails from our most tenured employees and Excel files that had been put into cloud drives that no one had paid attention to. And we basically gathered together 30 years of data at understanding what our cultural needs were of our clients when they came to us. And we found that there were basically 6 cultural beliefs that they felt were lacking, that they needed to improve. And they were around collaboration, transparency, results orientation, accountability, and people orientation. So we looked at those, we were like, okay, those are what our clients want. Let's test with Stanford which one of those actually wins, because just because a leader says we think we need more of this doesn't mean that will actually work the best, right?
Sure.
We all have biases about what we think is the best culture. I know what I like, you might like something totally different. If we both become competing CEOs, one of us is going to win. Who knows which one, right?
Yep.
So the Stanford professor that I partnered with looked at my list and said, very interesting, I have a couple other themes that I've studied. Can I add them? And so I said, of course. He added those. And it turns out there was only one culture type that was significantly correlated with revenue growth and outwon every other culture type. And it was none of the ones that our clients had asked for.
Wow.
It was one that the Stanford professor added in, and that was an adaptive culture. So what's up with adaptive culture? Adaptive culture is the ability to shift the hearts and minds of your people in response to shifting strategy. Remember, we talked about alignment?
Yep.
Purpose, strategy, culture, alignment is winning. So if your strategy shifts, which by the way, shifts within a year many times, right? Oh, AI is happening, got to shift our strategy. Now we got to be digital, let's shift our strategy. Now we're going to expand, let's shift our strategy. Now we're in a scale effort rather than now we have to merger and acquisition, shift strategy, new leadership, shift strategy. Strategy is changing all the time. How can you adapt your culture to keep up with the needed changes in how people need to think and act to drive that strategy? That's the winning ticket. And it turns out that's exactly what our frameworks are about. It's how to shift culture, right?
Yeah.
So at first I thought, oh no, we haven't been doing it right the whole time. But then I realized actually every single client has come to us saying, we need to shift our strategy. Can you help us? And they had a bias about what they wanted to shift to.
Yep.
And in fact, we needed to help them learn how to shift. And what we help them shift to was not the point, because hopefully 2 years later, they'll take what they learn and shift again. And that's an adaptive culture, and that's what wins.
So earlier you talked about kind of the ROI of culture. It doesn't have to be the touchy-feely stuff. So can you share an example, a case study of how you were able to do that in the context of, kind of that agile mentality or adaptive mentality?
Yeah, absolutely. So Redstone Federal Credit Union is a client of ours, has been a client for a long time. And they came to us at a time when they were in turmoil and they wanted to achieve some new results. So it started with them reaching out and saying, okay, let's talk about, we want to drive membership growth. We have very specific financial numbers that we want to achieve. And so we started by asking them, okay, tell us what it is. What are the current cultural beliefs that are getting in the way of you achieving those results, and what do they need to be? What they identified was they wanted to be less siloed and more collaborative. They wanted more trust in leadership and a few other things. So we helped them nurture those beliefs by working with their team to create consistent experiences that would reinforce those right beliefs. One of the things they did was every single meeting they had 2 leaders from 2 different teams join and introduce that meeting together as joint leaders to show the leadership team is trusting each other. You can too. We are collaborating at the leadership level. So can you.
Yep.
They had a bury the hatchet ceremony where they literally took a hatchet and buried it in the ground as a symbolic gesture of moving on from whatever was past. But then really where I think the magic lied was they started recognizing people when they would collaborate across silos. They gave feedback to people when they weren't. They were telling stories about wins of people living that new belief system.
Yep.
And the results they got were incredible. They got 55% annual growth in annual non-interest income. They got 1,052% increase in loans, 1,179% increase in membership, 1,600% increase in monetary donations to local communities. We measured the ROI of this culture transformation on this business. And I actually spoke to someone from Redstone today who said that engagement in changing our culture was the catalyst for all the growth that we've experienced. So you cannot tell me that culture doesn't drive results. It does. Yeah.
It's worth the spend.
Yeah.
Awesome. You touched on M&A, and at ALM First, we assist institutions in evaluating merger and acquisition opportunities. Culture is often cited as a big part of those decisions. With more M&A activity in the industry, what are some of the key considerations or potential stumbling blocks when two organizations with different cultures join forces?
Great question. So when I was at Oracle has a very heavy M&A strategy, and I partnered with the M&A team on some initiative for them, right? Their internal M&A team was doing some kind of team building thing. So I got to know them, started asking them about Oracle's M&A approach. And they have this 35-page document that's their due diligence document that they go through to see if it's going to be a fit. And it was, the financials, obviously, and the job roles and job descriptions and, everything.
Yep.
And I said, what do you have in there about culture? Not a question existed about culture in that document. And that was one of the things that they had identified as being the make or break success or failure in any M&As. Does the culture match? Now, when it's a culture match, it's an easy win. When it's a culture mismatch, it's a hard road, especially if you're not paying attention. Now, there are times where culture mismatches can be a benefit to a merger and acquisition, as long as you're intentional about that. Right. So on my podcast, I have a podcast too called Culture Leaders, and I interview CEOs and ask them about their experience. And one of the people I had on there was a guy named Aaron Ain, who was the CEO of Kronos for 40 years and then became UKG after an acquisition merger with Ultimate. Right. So Ultimate and Kronos merged to create UKG, which is this large tech SaaS company. And I asked him what he would have done differently about that merger, because it was treated like a merger. And he said those cultures were so completely different. One was kind of agile, innovative, doing the kind of throw spaghetti at the wall mentality. And the other was very structured, very organized, very disciplined, super different cultures. He says that doesn't mean it was doomed to fail. In fact, it was one of the most successful mergers in tech history. He said the thing that I would have done differently is I would have thrown out both cultures. Instead of trying to create Ultimate Kronos group and merge these two, let's just throw away Ultimate, throw away Kronos, and create a new entity. Call it, Synergize, something super lame like that, right? And say, we're going to co-create a new purpose, a new strategy, and a new culture that everyone can either get on board with or not. And you don't see that very often when you see organizations go through M&A, is like, well, let's just reinvent a new entity. I think that was a very interesting reflection on his part, that he said if he could go back, he would do it that way.
Yeah, that's pretty insightful. That's really cool. Hadn't thought about it like that at all. Let's talk a little bit about, we've heard a lot that, COVID has changed the landscape in a lot of different ways. And so now with more work from home employees, we just heard Amazon is requiring all their employees to come back. Talk a little bit about how you create a culture when you have a remote workforce or a hybrid workforce or something different maybe than you had in the past.
Yes, it's very easy to lean into personal exchanges that go well and call that your culture. It's just, that's not culture. Culture is the experiences we co-create for each other, which lead to certain beliefs that drive our actions and get results. So in a remote environment, you have experiences that are virtual as opposed to experiences in person. I have, my boss sends me a text message that just says, hey, and I panic every time. It's an experience. Oh my goodness, I'm in trouble. What is he emailing me for? What is he texting me for? What's the problem? And then every time after that, it inevitably is something good. Heard your podcast. It sounded great. How was the keynote? How are you doing? You need anything? And he's a really nice guy. For some reason, I just have panic every time I get a text message from him. And so that's something that is an experience that's because of my past. It's because of past bosses, right?
Yeah.
And the belief is something that will change over time as I continue to engage with my new boss. I don't have to spend time with him in person. I have literally never been to our headquarters at Culture Partners. I've been here for 2.5 years. It exists. It's in Temecula, California, which I believe is in SoCal, but I've never been there. My boss lives in Northern California. He only goes for board meetings. Most employees at our company have never been there, because it just doesn't make sense for where we are in our organization at this time. We are rapidly evolving. We want to recruit the best talent. We do that from all over the nation and all over the globe. We're a global company now. Being together in person isn't what we need to do, because we coach to beliefs.
Yep.
And we don't get stuck in the action trap, which is focusing on, are you doing enough activity for me to justify paying you as much as I do? And are you getting results? It's very easy as managers to just manage activity.
Yep.
But you're not managing to outcomes in that. And I think the companies who are forcing people back into the office have either a real estate motivation, maybe they've got some kind of political motivation. The government officials are saying, you're killing our downtown, come on back. Mm-hmm. Amazon's probably one of those.
Yeah.
Or they just don't know how to manage to outcomes, and it's lazy leadership, and they're going backwards in time, and they just want to go back to how it was before, which I think they can do better. But some companies like Amazon don't care, because they will be able to recruit plenty of people.
Yeah. And
they're not worried about the folks that are going to get upset about going back into the office 5 days a week. And by the way, in assigned seats. They're like, they have those remote stations you can they're not doing that anymore either. It's back to preschool level assigned seating.
Well, let's stop talking about the past and let's look to the future. How do you envision the future of workplace culture evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? And what trends do you see maybe as most impactful? And how can leaders prepare for those changes?
Well, it's going to either be super awesome or super terrible. It's one of the two. And I see
All right.
So there is increasing anti-work sentiment that is getting louder and louder and louder. Employees are upset about the pay equity gap. They're upset about shift schedules. They're upset about getting sent back to the office. They are upset about not being able to afford basic groceries and inflation. Gen Z is giving up. There's a lack of hope in the youngest generation. Increasingly, they're becoming NEETs, which is an acronym, N-E-E-T, which is neither in education, employment, or training, because they're like, why bother?
Wow.
They're living with their baby boomer parents, who are the wealthiest generation of all time, and they're just going to wait it out until those people croak and give them their inheritance, right? And the opioid demic is at an all-time high. Depression and suicide rates are at an all-time high. The system is not working for everyone.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing increased unionization that is in response to that. You're seeing it's also, the narrative is no longer being controlled the way that it used to be. So we used to have unidirectional communication. It was from the top down, and people could share in their families, but media was controlled, communications in corporate was controlled. Now you have social media, and so you have multi-directional communication sharing. And so people who are on the front lines working the counter at McDonald's can take a video of the crappy working conditions, post it on TikTok, and now McDonald's brand is suffering if that goes viral, and they've got to jump. Right? Disney, someone died at Disney because they ate something that was food poisoning. Disney tried to go to court and argue that because they signed a release liability waiver because they had a Disney Plus membership, that they were resolved about any liability. Someone said, look at what Disney is doing. That went viral. Disney immediately backed off. Oh, I'm so sorry. We do not want the bad press, because I think what's happening in the future of workplace culture is that your culture and your brand are now one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
The culture that your people experience is public, and your brand is going to be greatly affected by the culture that your employees experience, and it's beyond the customer experience they're creating. I go on Blind and Glassdoor, and I can go on these websites where people can anonymously post their gripes about a company and what their experience is. So culture and brand are merging. People are going to either have to step up and improve their culture, and therefore their brand to stay relevant and stay competitive in a capitalist market and pay their people a fair wage so that those people will be positive about their culture and therefore the brand wins, or it's going to get way worse and there's going to be a revolution. There's going to be a general strike where all of American union workers get together and strike at the same time and they say enough is enough, where people opt out of the workforce and the workforce labor shortage affects companies to a point where they realize they can't do anything. I think that it's going to go one way or another, because right now the water is beginning to boil and you're seeing that in so many different ways. Boeing strike is a more recent relevant example that you're seeing. 33,000 people went on strike at Boeing because they want to save the culture of Boeing. Boeing was an engineering powerhouse. It turned into a company that was run by financial accountants once they did M&A with McDonnell Douglas in 97, right? The financial accountants came in and said, you know what's cheaper? Less quality assurance protocols. So then the big planes became unsafe, and the Boeing engineers are saying, this is not okay. We cannot let these finance-driven executives make bad decisions. It's turning our company into a garbage brand and unsafe for consumers. And they're on strike to save Boeing. Now, interestingly, the CEO that they're striking under is brand new. He's been there for 5 weeks.
Right.
And so poor guy, he was running a totally different business his entire career. And he's come in and he's created a whole, there's a whole problem now. Right. Not he has created, but there's a whole dynamic now.
Welcome aboard.
And because all those people are striking, what does he have to do? He's got to temporarily lay off and furlough the rest of the employees who are non-union workers, which is pissing everyone off. Meanwhile, he just bought a $4 million house. That becomes the headline. This guy has been a CEO of another company for decades. Of course, he's earned the right to buy a $4 million house. For a CEO, that's not even that much money, theoretically, right? And yet, the headline is CEO is totally tone deaf as these people go on strike. So image and culture are intertwined in a way that it hasn't been before. And so CEOs are under enormous pressure to make the right decisions and do it for the company, do it for the culture, do it for the brand.
So that's a great way to lead into our closing thoughts. What ideas, what tips, what action should CEOs take to build a strong, viable, lasting culture?
Great question. So our research shows that the number one thing you can do to drive business results in your organization is to be clear on what those results are. And you would be shocked at how many companies don't have clear results that are cascaded throughout the business. I was working with one organization there in the manufacturing sector. I was working with their leadership team. It was a closed door session, just the C-suite and the CEO. And I said, let's get clear on results. What result are you trying to achieve? Anyone? And someone raised his hand, probably, I can't remember. It was the CMO or one of those leaders said, yes, our growth goal is 5% for this upcoming year. I said, great. And then someone interrupted him, raised his hand and said, no, I'm sorry, our growth goal this year is 7%. And I got confused. And then I said, okay, anyone else? And someone else raised their hand and said, actually, I thought our growth goal was 6%. So we all look to the CEO and we say, so, Mr. CEO, what is the growth goal for this year? And he was very clever. He said, well, it's somewhere between 5 and 7%. Now, what was going on in that room was that they didn't even get clear on their results. Actually, all of those numbers were true in a way. 5% was the goal they told the board. 7% was the stretch goal that would get them to the, big vacation retreat that they would send everyone to if they won. 6% was the goal that they actually thought was feasible. So all these numbers had been shared and spread around. But when you can't get 10 people in a room to get clear on the goal, how on earth are your frontline workers going to understand what the goal is and work towards that? So 1, get clear on the goal. 2, don't focus on what action needs to be taken, but rather ask yourself, what beliefs do we need to hold in order to take the right action to get that goal? Once you figure that out, be very explicit about it, define what those beliefs are, and then start creating intentional experiences that will drive the right beliefs. The simplest experiences you can create are storytelling, recognition, and feedback. You start giving people feedback and recognition and telling stories of people who are living those beliefs and tying that to how it'll help us drive results. You've become the person who makes culture intentional, and you really drive results. You will get the ROI.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jessica. This has been very insightful.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this insightful journey into the world of leadership and workplace culture. We've learned that the path to fostering a positive work environment is not just about having a mission statement on a plaque or a few fun office perks. It's about consistently aligning purpose, strategy, and culture to drive results. As Jessica shared, the key to success lies in understanding the experiences that shape beliefs and actions within an organization. Regardless of the industry, adapting your culture to meet the needs of your team and the ever-evolving landscape is crucial. At the end of each episode, I like to take a moment and let you know about some of the additional resources we have available. ALM First has a robust workshop, conference, and webinar schedule, so be sure to visit our website for more details on these, as well as our education hub and resource center for recorded webinars, articles, and much, much more. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for listening to In Your Best Interest, an ALM First podcast.
The content in this podcast is provided for informational purposes and should not be relied upon as recommendations or financial planning advice. We encourage you to seek personalized advice from qualified professionals regarding all investment decisions. Current and future holdings are subject to risk, and past performance is no guarantee of future results. Podcasts should not be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced, in whole or in part. Information presented herein is for discussion and illustrative purposes only and is not a recommendation or an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The views and opinions expressed by the ALM First financial advisor speakers are their own as of the date of the recording. Any such views are subject to change at any time based upon market or other conditions, and ALM First financial advisors disclaims any responsibility to update such views. These views should not be relied on as investment advice, and because investment decisions are based on numerous factors, may not be relied on as an indication of trading intent on behalf of any ALM First financial advisor's product. Neither ALM First financial advisors nor the speaker can be held responsible for any direct or incidental loss incurred by applying any of the information offered. ALM First Financial Advisors is an SEC-registered investment advisor with a fiduciary duty that requires it to act in the best interests of clients and to place the interests of clients before its own. However, registration as an investment advisor does not imply any level of skill or training.